The morning mist hung low over the River Clyde, turning the harbor into a quiet dream. Wooden masts rose like a forest of ghosts, each ship creaking gently in the chill air. I had spent my life among them, vessels that bowed to the wind, their sails billowing like white lungs breathing the sky. But that day, something entirely new waited at the dock. A thing that neither whispered nor drifted, but hummed. She was called the Comet, a squat, iron-limbed vessel with a chimney instead of a mast and a heart that beat with fire. The townsfolk gathered around her in disbelief. "That's no ship," one old sailor muttered, spitting into the water. "That's a floating furnace." Yet curiosity won over fear. For where there is smoke, there is always a story. And I, barely 19, was desperate to be part of one. When Captain Henry Bell himself approached, coat flapping in the cold wind, he looked less like a man of the sea and more like a man chasing the future. "You there?" he said, eyeing my rough hands. "Ever tended a fire?" I nodded, though I'd only stoked kitchen hearths. He smiled faintly. "Then you'll learn fast. The sea's changing, lad. It won't wait for anyone." As I stepped aboard, the deck felt alive beneath my boots. The smell of coal mixed with river salt. And beneath my feet, iron plates shivered with the breath of the engine. Men moved like ants, hauling black sacks of fuel, faces already smudged with soot. The air was thick with heat and something else, doubt. By noon, the crowd on the dock had grown. When the captain ordered, "Light her," a hiss escaped from deep within the ship, followed by a low, thunderous growl. Black smoke curled into the sky, dark and defiant. Mothers clutched their children, sailors crossed themselves. Yet the Comet began to move, slow, steady against the current, without a whisper of wind. For the first time, a ship defied nature itself, and standing there, soot-streaked and trembling, I felt the world tilt beneath me. The age of sail was ending, and something fierce, mechanical, and unstoppable was taking its place. That night, as the sky bled red over the Clyde, the Comet rested quietly, her chimney still breathing out faint curls of smoke. I lay awake on deck, listening to her metallic heart beat against the silence. I didn't yet know it, but we were no longer sailors of the sea. We were sailors of a new age, one forged in iron, fire, and the stubborn will of men who dared to challenge the wind. The first voyage began under gray skies and uneasy hearts. We left the Clyde with 30 men, some seasoned sailors, others like me, drawn by curiosity more than courage. The Comet groaned as the fire roared to life, her iron belly rumbling with power. It wasn't the graceful lift of sails we were used to. It was a raw, trembling force that came from deep below, like the awakening of something ancient and angry. The air below deck was thick and suffocating. The engine room, or the fire pit as we called it, for it was hell itself. Flames danced behind iron grates and the floor shuddered with every beat of the pistons. Our task was simple but endless. Feed the furnace, keep the pressure alive. We shoveled coal until our backs ached and our faces turned black. Each clang of metal, each hiss of steam was a reminder that this ship wasn't just sailing on the sea. It was fighting against it. At night, when I stumbled up to the deck for air, I could see the old sailing ships in the distance, their white sails glowing like ghosts under the moon. The men from those ships called us madmen, and perhaps they were right. The Comet made no sound of sails snapping or ropes creaking, only the relentless churning of her paddles and the low thunder of her heart. It was both beautiful and terrifying, like watching a storm trapped inside iron. But slowly our fear began to change. The first time we crossed a still patch of water, a dead calm that would have stranded any sailing ship, the Comet kept moving. No wind, no waves, yet we advanced, steady as destiny. The men stared at each other in silence. Even Captain Bell, who rarely showed emotion, allowed himself a small smile. "Gentlemen," he said, "the wind no longer commands us." That moment etched itself into my soul. The ocean, which had always dictated man's pace, was suddenly ours to command. Yet deep down, I felt something stir, not triumph, but unease. For in bending nature to our will, What price would we pay? As the Comet pressed forward into open sea, smoke trailing behind her like a black banner, I realized this was no mere voyage. We weren't just sailors anymore. We were keepers of fire, and the sea had never known fire before. By the third week at sea, the Comet no longer felt like a marvel. She felt like a burden. Her iron heart never slept. The furnace demanded constant feeding, and we, her crew, became slaves to its hunger. The air below deck was a furnace of its own, hot, thick, and full of soot. Coal dust clung to our lungs like grief, and every breath tasted of metal. I watched men grow hollow-eyed from exhaustion. Their hands blistered from the shovels, their shirts soaked with sweat that turned black from ash. The youngest among us, Tom Fletcher, barely 16, collapsed one afternoon, coughing up blood. The captain ordered him to rest, but there was no real rest on the Comet. The fire didn't care for weakness. Above deck, things weren't much kinder. The wind carried the stench of burnt coal instead of salt, and the once white deck was streaked with soot. The ocean around us glimmered under the haze of smoke trailing from the funnel, a dark ribbon stretching into the horizon. Some nights I'd stand by the railing and watch it twist into the stars, wondering if mankind had truly tamed nature, or merely scarred it. Then one evening, disaster came close. A hiss, louder than usual, erupted from the boiler room. The engineer's face went pale. "Pressure's rising too fast," he shouted. We scrambled to release the valves, hands shaking, hearts pounding. The roar that followed was deafening, a blast of steam so fierce it scalded the walls. For a moment, I thought we'd all be torn apart. But the pressure eased, and the Comet steadied herself once more. That night no one spoke. Even the captain sat quietly, staring at the glowing embers beneath the iron grates. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Every invention asks for a price. Ours just hasn't told us what it is yet." I lay awake, listening to the slow churn of the paddles and the uneasy whisper of the waves. We had broken the limits of wind and current, but in doing so, we had bound ourselves to something more dangerous, the unrelenting appetite of progress itself. And as the stars reflected faintly on the black water, I couldn't shake the thought. Perhaps the sea was waiting for us to forget our place. The first signs came with the gulls. They vanished. Every sailor knows what that means. The air grew heavy, the horizon bruised with dark clouds, and the wind fell eerily still. The Comet sailed straight into it, her chimney exhaling a steady plume of smoke against the silence. Captain Bell stood at the helm, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the sea as if daring it to move first. By dusk, the first wave struck. It wasn't the rise and fall of ordinary tides. It was a wall of gray that swallowed the bow whole. The deck tilted sharply, barrels rolled, ropes snapped, and somewhere below, a man screamed. The sky cracked open with thunder so fierce it felt like the heavens were splitting. On a sailing ship, storms were old enemies. You'd reef the sails, pray to the wind, and let nature decide. But on the Comet, there were no sails to furl, no masts to cling to. We had only fire. The engine kept churning, defiant and deafening, even as waves crashed over us. Each surge threatened to drown the boiler, and if the flames went out, we'd be left dead in the water. "Keep her alive, lads!" the captain roared above the chaos. We shoveled coal with shaking hands, soaked to the bone, sweat and seawater indistinguishable. Steam hissed around us like a serpent's breath. The fire dimmed, then flared again, bright and angry. Every clang of the engine sounded like a heartbeat refusing to die. Hours passed in a blur of noise and fury. Lightning struck the water close enough to blind us, painting the Comet in brief flashes of white fire. The smell of salt, smoke, and iron filled the air, the scent of a world being reborn through violence. Then, just before dawn, the wind shifted. The waves began to calm. The first pale light of morning revealed the river-streaked faces of men who looked older than they were. The Comet had survived. Barely. Her deck was splintered, her funnel bent, her paddles scarred. But she lived. And as the sun rose behind her smoke, even the sea seemed to acknowledge her. That day we learned something no chart could teach. That courage was not in sails or stars, but in the will to keep the fire burning, when the sea demanded silence. When the storm finally loosened its grip, we drifted in a silence that felt almost sacred. The sky, scrubbed clean by the wind, blazed gold and red, and the Comet floated like a wounded survivor, her funnel crooked, her deck blackened, but still breathing smoke. Around us, the sea stretched calm and endless, as if pretending nothing had happened. Captain Bell emerged from below, his coat torn, face streaked with soot. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at his ship, this strange, stubborn creature of iron and fire, and nodded once like a father seeing his child survive their first fight. "She's done it," he finally said, voice hoarse. "She's proven herself." The crew cheered weakly, but behind our smiles was awe. We had witnessed something the world had never seen, a machine that had defied both sea and storm. The Comet limped back toward the River Clyde, her paddles beating slow but steady. As we approached the harbor, crowds lined the docks again just as they had months before. Only this time they didn't laugh or whisper. They stood in silence, watching the black smoke rise into the morning air. Not as a curiosity, but as a sign of what was coming. When my boots touched land, I felt the earth shift beneath me, as if the world itself had changed its rhythm. The old ships, their sails neatly furled, looked fragile beside the iron beast we had sailed. I knew then that something immense had begun, not just for us, but for every soul who would ever cross an ocean. That night I returned to the deck one last time. The Comet rested quietly, her fires low, her reflection trembling in the dark water. I placed a hand on her warm iron rail and whispered, "You've changed everything." The river carried the smoke toward the horizon, where the sky met the sea in a faint glow. It struck me that this wasn't just a story of invention. It was the story of mankind, forever building, forever daring, forever burning its hands just to touch the future. The age of sail had ended not with a storm, but with a whisper of steam beneath a rising sun. And somewhere within that golden dawn, between smoke and sky, I realized we had not only tamed the sea, we had awakened the modern world. And so the first steamship did more than conquer the sea. It conquered time itself. Every puff of smoke from her chimney marked the heartbeat of a new era, one where man no longer bowed to nature but dared to stand beside it. But tell me this, when progress first roared to life beneath our feet, did we truly master the fire, or did the fire begin to master us? If stories like this move you, tales of courage, invention, and the forgotten hands that built our world, then stay with us. Because here at Ages and Ashes, history still breathes one story at a time.